The contract was already on the table when Ilara Voss walked into her father's office. She had not been summoned. She had overheard the voices through the door, quiet and careful, the kind men use when they are deciding something about someone they do not expect to walk in. She pushed the door open and crossed the room before either man could speak. Her father stood near the window, with his back partly turned. Across the desk sat an older man she had never met in person, but whose name she had been told once, briefly, almost in passing. Elder Cassian, of Blackthorn Pack. Silver-haired, straight-backed, with eyes the color of old iron and the settled patience of a man who had conducted many such negotiations and found them all, in the end, manageable. She stood at the edge of the table and read every line without touching the page. 1 year minimum. All Luna duties to be performed at formal pack events. No public disclosure of the contractual nature of the arrangement. The Blackthorn Pack to provide full military alliance and territorial protection to Voss lands for the duration. Renewal terms negotiable. Signature of Ilara Voss required to complete the agreement. She straightened. She looked at her father. He held her gaze for less than a second. Then he looked at the window. There was no other way, he said. He said it quietly and without inflection, the way a man says something he has already rehearsed enough times that the feeling has been worn out of it. Ilara had known her father her whole life. She knew the shape of his choices, the heavy and particular weight of them, the way they landed in a room. She had watched him carry the burden of their pack's vulnerability for 20 years, watched it take the color from his hair and the ease from his stride. She knew what it meant when he could not hold her eyes. She picked up the pen. She signed her name, steady and clear. She set the pen down with a precise click. Then she walked out of the room without looking at either of them, and she did not close the door hard, and she did not say a word, because there was nothing left to say, and she had learned a long time ago that silence was not the same thing as surrender. She went back to her own room. She sat on the edge of her bed and let the morning sit around her, still and ordinary, while the full weight of what she had just done settled slowly into her bones. Outside her window, the Voss Pack ground stretched green in the late spring light, familiar down to the last stone path and bent fence post. She had grown up here. This was the field where she first learned to run with the pack. This was the ridge where her mother had taken her to watch the moon rise on her 7th birthday. This was the house she had lived in every single year of her 24 years of life. She did not let herself feel all of that for long. She had learned, through practice and necessity, how to turn the volume down on things that would stop her from moving. She stood. She pulled a bag from the wardrobe. She began to pack. She believed in one bag. One bag forced you to decide what actually mattered. She packed 4 changes of clothes. Her worn notebook, which she had been filling since she was 12 years old and which was nearly full now, the pages soft from use. Her mother's journal, which she had been carrying for 6 years but had never fully read, always opening to the middle and then closing it again before she could get too far. And a photograph, herself at 16, her arm around her mother on a summer evening, both of them slightly blurred at the edges because they had been laughing when someone took it, and neither of them had stayed still. She put the photograph in the bag. She took it back out. She put it in again and pulled the zipper shut before she could change her mind. The car arrived before dawn. The driver was a neutral party, arranged through the pack council, and he did not speak, which suited her perfectly. She sat in the back with her bag on the seat beside her and watched the darkness outside the window as the car moved away from Voss territory and into the stretches of open road between packs. She watched the sky go from black to deep blue to gray. She let her mind go soft and wide, and she did not make herself think about what she was leaving, because there was no point in that kind of thinking right now. Her mother had told her once that the space between thoughts was where you found out what you actually believed, if you could stay there long enough without filling it with noise. Ilara had practiced that for years. She was good at it now. What she believed, at the core, was simple. She had signed the paper because her pack needed protection that she could provide by doing this. That was the whole of it. A year was a finite amount of time. Finite things were survivable. She had survived longer stretches of hard things than a year. Blackthorn territory announced itself not with a sign but with a feeling. The air in the car changed first. The pressure of it, the quality, something older and heavier settling in. Every wolf felt the weight of a pack's territory differently, but she had always felt it in the back of her chest, like a hand pressing in from the outside. Darian Blackthorn's force was heavier than anything she had felt in her own territory. Not threatening, not aggressive, just absolute. The difference between a current and bedrock. The road narrowed. Trees pressed in from both sides, dense and dark, the undergrowth thick between the trunks. The car wound through forest for 10 minutes, and then the trees broke, and the main house of Blackthorn territory stood at the end of a long lane. It was large, and built of dark stone and heavy timber, 3 stories high, with wide front steps and many windows. Lights burned behind the upper windows despite the early hour. Behind the house, the pack grounds spread wide in the gray morning, the training field visible to the east, a row of outbuildings further back, and at the far northern edge, where the clear land ended, the forest began again. Those particular trees were darker than the others, denser, as if they had grown here longer and grown differently. The car stopped. The driver set her bag by the front door and left without a word. Elara stood on the steps in the cold morning and waited. She counted to 20 before the door opened. Cora was a solid woman in her middle 50s, with gray streaked hair, and the kind of face that has stopped being surprised by much of anything. She looked Elara over once, thoroughly and without cruelty, and then stepped back. "Come in," she said. The house was warm inside. Cora walked her through it without ornamentation. Kitchen, great hall, common rooms, library, which was on the second floor, with 2 full walls of shelves, and a reading table beside the window. Then upstairs, her room, at the end of a long corridor on the second floor, with a wide window that faced the back grounds. The room was large and clean. The bed was made with fresh linens. There was a desk, a wardrobe, a small empty bookshelf. The air smelled of beeswax and pine. "Pack meals are at 7 morning, midday, and 7 evening in the great hall downstairs," Cora said from the doorway. "Evening meal is expected of you. The others are optional. Hot water takes 90 seconds from the tap. Towels in the top cabinet. Staff room is at the bottom of the stairs on the left if you need anything." She paused. "The Alpha won't be back until this evening." "Thank you," Elara said. Cora gave her one more quiet look, the kind that means many things, and says none of them. Then she left. Elara unpacked slowly. She hung her clothes in the wardrobe. She set her notebook and her mother's journal on the desk, both of them closed. She took the photograph from the bag and stood looking at it for 5 seconds, herself and her mother blurred and laughing in the summer light, before she placed it face down on the small shelf. She was not ready to look at it yet. She needed to be present here, fully and without distraction, and looking at that photograph would pull her somewhere else. She gave herself the morning to learn the shape of the place. She walked every floor of the house, and then the grounds, slowly and without hurry. She noted the guard positions, the training schedules visible from the eastern field, the patrol timing she could infer from the pattern of wolves returning to the main building in pairs. She identified the outbuildings, equipment storage, a smaller meeting hall, what looked like medical quarters. At the far northern end of the grounds, a heavy lock on an unmarked door with no windows. She noted that too. The north tree line drew her more than once. She could not have explained it in precise terms. The trees there were dark and close, and the undergrowth below them was thick, and the air that came from between them had a quality she could not name, only feel, like something in those trees was leaning toward her, like the forest already knew who she was. A guard stood at the boundary. She did not approach it. By afternoon, the pack had returned from their runs, and the grounds were full. 30 wolves, perhaps more, moving in groups through the clear land. They looked at her. Some held the look, most let it go quickly. She met their eyes calmly, without challenge and without apology, and let them make up their own minds. A woman named Lena came and sat beside her on a bench near the training field, without asking permission, and told her, in plain and direct language, that she was neither an enemy nor a friend yet, that the pack had hoped for a true mate for their alpha, and not a contract, and that Elara should know this and account for it. "I know," Elara said. Lena looked at her sideways. "You're not going to tell me I'm being unfair. You're being honest," Elara said. "That's more useful." Lena studied her for a long moment. "Rowan's keeping an eye on you," she said, standing. "With Rowan, that's a good thing." She walked back toward the field. The great hall at dinner was loud and full and warm. When Elara walked in, the room adjusted. Not dramatically. Just the way a room adjusts when something unexpected enters it. A slight shift in the quality of the noise. Heads turning and turning back. She served herself from the long table and sat in the middle of the hall, visible but not performing, and ate. Nadia sat 3 tables to her left and did not look at her once. That was its own kind of language, and Alara read it clearly. Rowan came to her table halfway through the meal. He sat without ceremony, lean and watchful, and said, "One piece of advice for the first week." "Go on," she said. "Don't try to win them. Let them look. The looking is free. It's the judgment that comes after that you want to shape, and you shape that by being the same every day, until they run out of reasons to be wary." "And if they don't run out?" she asked. "They will," he said. He refilled his water glass. "This pack responds to consistency, more than almost anything. Their alpha has been consistent for 6 years. That's why they trust him, even when they're angry at him." He stood. "Good luck tonight," he said, meaning the meeting with Darian. Then he went back to his own table. She was carrying her plate toward the kitchen when the doors at the far end of the hall opened and Darian Blackthorne walked in. The room did not stop, but it settled. Every wolf in the hall adjusted at once, the way a compass needle swings when a magnet enters the room, subtle and complete. Alara felt it in the back of her chest, the weight of his force, closer now than it had been through the walls of the car, denser and more specific. He was tall and dark-haired. He moved through the hall the way certain people move through rooms, without needing to take up space, because the space rearranges itself. His face held no expression she could read. His eyes swept the room once, efficiently, and found her. He held the look for exactly 2 seconds. Then he moved to the head table. 20 minutes later, Rowan appeared at her shoulder. "Study, 2nd floor." The study was long, lined with maps and books, a wide desk at the center. Darian stood behind the desk. He still wore his jacket from travel. He had the look of a man who had been moving since before dawn, and had stopped only because the next task required it. He gave her the rules without preamble. No north wing. No study without permission. Pack meals and all formal events required. No disclosure of terms. No unauthorized communication with outside packs. Everything else was her own time and her own business. She listened fully, and said yes once. At the end. He looked at her for a longer moment then. Not the way he had looked at her in the hall. Something more direct. Something that was trying to read past the surface of what he was seeing. "You're not frightened," he said. "No," she said. "Most people who come here for the first time are." "I understand why," she said. "But I know what I signed, and I know why I signed it." Frightened doesn't help anything. He was quiet for a moment. And then he said something she did not expect. "Agreed. Fear makes everything harder than it needs to be." He nodded once. She left. That night, she stood at the window of her room in the dark for a long time. Below, the last wolves were crossing the grounds to the dormitory buildings. The training lights had gone out one by one. The North Forest stood at the edge of the cleared land, black against the night sky. She pressed her palm flat against the glass and felt the cold of it. Inside her, in the deep and specific place below her ribs, where her wolf had lived for 3 years, in a stillness she had taught herself not to question, something moved. Not much. Barely the width of a breath. A small, careful warmth, like an ember that has been covered too long pressing back toward heat. She had not felt that in 3 years. Not since the night her shift went strange and wrong and then stopped being possible, and she had been so frightened she had told no one. She had learned to live without it. She had told herself she was fine. She put her hand flat against her chest and paid attention. Outside, somewhere past the north boundary in the dark between the old trees, a wolf called out. Long and clear and unhurried, the kind of howl that is not a warning and not a question, but simply the statement of a living thing saying, "I am here in the night." Alara stood at the window and listened until the sound was completely gone. Then she closed the curtain and went to bed, and lay in the dark, and thought about what she was beginning here, and what it might cost her, and whether she had the reserves left to see it through. She did not answer herself. She let the question sit, open and alive, and held it there. She was good at beginning again. She had done it many times. The question was never whether she could begin. The question was always what this particular beginning was going to ask of her in the end. She closed her eyes. The warmth below her ribs held for one more moment, steady and small, and then it was quiet again. She slept. 3 days into her time at Blackthorn territory, Alara understood that the pack's feelings were not going to stay quiet. It started small, a table that cleared when she sat down at it, a conversation that stopped mid-sentence when she walked past, a pair of wolves who moved to a different lane of the training field when she chose to observe from the fence nearby. None of it was loud. None of it was ugly. It was the kind of cold that does not announce itself, the kind that finds you through gaps and seams, and makes itself known without ever presenting a surface you can push back against. She did not react to any of it. She showed up to every meal. She walked the grounds on her own schedule. She used the library. She said good morning to the people she passed, and did not measure the responses she got back. On the fourth morning she came down to breakfast, and found a seat at the main table, and Nadia came in, 20 minutes later, with 4 others, and sat 2 chairs away from her. Not across, not beside, 2 chairs, on the same side. Alara drank her tea and said nothing. "You read a lot," Nadia said, not looking at her. "I do," Alara said. "The library here is for pack members." "Rowan showed me where it was," Alara said. "He told me I was welcome to use it." Nadia was quiet for a moment. "Rowan shows everyone where things are," she said. "It's what he does." "That's generous of him," Alara said. Another silence. One of the women with Nadia was watching Alara with open interest, not unfriendly exactly. More the way you watch someone doing something you haven't seen before, and you're still deciding what to think of it. "Your pack," Nadia said. "Voss territory. It's smaller than ours." "Yes," Alara said. "Your father runs it." "Yes. And you were chosen for this arrangement because I was available, and willing, and my father needed the alliance," Alara said simply. "I'm not pretending it was anything else." Nadia looked at her then, full on, the first time she had looked directly at Alara since she arrived. Something moved in her expression that was harder to read than the coldness she had been showing until now. "At least you're honest," she said. "I've found it's easier," Alara said. Nadia picked up her fork and went back to her food. The conversation around her resumed. Alara finished her tea. It was not warmth, and it was not friendship, and it was nowhere near trust. But it was the first real exchange they had had, and it landed differently than the silence had. That morning, Rowan told her the pack was running mid-distance drills on the east field, and asked if she wanted to observe. She said yes, and spent 2 hours at the fence watching the pack move. The drills were rigorous and precisely organized: speed work, tracking patterns, formation runs in pairs and then in larger groups. The wolves were good, fast and disciplined, and attuned to each other, in the way packs become attuned when they have trained together through difficulty, rather than just routine. She watched them, and they watched her watching them, and both sides took something from it without saying so. Halfway through the session, one young wolf, running a straight-line speed drill, pulled up short when he got close to the fence where she stood. He looked at her, then at the ground. "Sorry," he said, "didn't see you there." "You were on a straight line," she said. "I stepped into it." He glanced up at her again, a slightly different look this time, and then jogged back toward the group without saying anything else. But she noted that when the next drill started, he did not veer toward the opposite side of the field, the way 2 other wolves had done when they saw her there. At midday, she ate in the kitchen with Cora, because the great hall felt large, and Cora did not require anything from her. Cora moved around the kitchen with the steady efficiency of someone who had been doing the same important work in the same way for 20 years, and did not need to make conversation about it. She put a cup of tea in front of Alara without being asked. "Is this what it's always like with someone new?" Alara asked. "Like what?" Cora said, not looking up from what she was doing. "Like being watched without being seen." Cora turned. She folded a cloth in her hands, and looked at Alara with the same unhurried thoroughness she had looked at her on the first morning. "Usually it's one or the other," she said. "Cold or warm. This one's in between because of what the pack believed in." She set the cloth on the counter. They believed their alpha would find a true mate eventually. They built a kind of future around that, not because he told them to. Just because people do that. They build futures around things that haven't happened yet. "And now that future doesn't look the same," Alara said. "No," Cora said. "It doesn't." She picked up her own cup. "That's not your fault. But it is something you walked into." Alara nodded. She drank her tea. In the afternoon, she went to the library and read about Blackthorn pack history, which she had decided was more useful than almost anything else she could do right now. She read about the founding, 3 generations back. She read about the territorial expansions, the alliances and the border disputes, the council structure and how it had changed over the decades. She found a chapter on the role of the Luna in Blackthorn tradition, and she read that twice. The Luna, according to the old texts, was not simply a social function. She was the emotional center of the pack. The Alpha held strength and direction. The Luna held warmth and memory. A pack without a true Luna was a pack running on half its nature. She sat with that for a while. Marin came in while she was still reading. The healer moved quietly, the way people do when they spend a lot of time in rooms where people are hurting, and have learned that sound matters. She set a small clay jar on the table beside Alara's book. "For dry hands," she said. "First-timers always get cracked knuckles by the second week from the altitude change." Alara looked at her hands. They were fine. She looked at Marin. Marin's mouth curved slightly. "All right. I came to see how you were getting on." She sat across the table. "Cora says you're steadier than she expected. Is that high praise from Cora?" "Very high," Marin said. Alara looked at the healer. There was something in Marin's face beyond the pleasantness of the visit, something knowing and patient that sat behind her eyes like a lamp behind a curtain, present but not yet brought forward. "How is your wolf?" Marin asked. Her voice was easy when she said it, conversational. The question landed more heavily than it looked. "Quiet," Alara said carefully, adjusting to the new territory. Marin held her gaze for a beat longer than the question required. Then she said, "My rooms are at the far end of the East Hall. If you ever need anything at all, day or night." She stood. "Take the cream, it does work." She left the jar and went back out. Alara picked up the jar. She turned it over in her hands. Then she put it in her jacket pocket and went back to her reading, and tried not to think too hard about the precise and careful way the healer had asked about her wolf. That evening the pack ran. She heard them gathering after dinner, the particular sound of wolves preparing to shift, something in the low frequency of their voices changing, the anticipation becoming something older and more animal. She stood at the window of her room and watched them cross the grounds in a loose and moving group, 30 of them or more, heading for the tree line. Their voices rose briefly, and then softened, and then dropped into something that was not quite silence, and not quite sound, and then they were at the edge of the trees, and then they were inside them, and the forest had them. The grounds were empty and quiet after that. She stood at the window for a long time. The lights of the outbuildings were still on. A few wolves who had stayed behind were visible at the far end of the field, moving slowly, not running. The training lights were on, though no one was using them. She put on her jacket and went downstairs and out the back door and walked across the quiet field toward the north tree line. She did not have a plan for doing this. She went because the pull was there again, the same pull she had felt on the first morning, and it was stronger at night than it had been in the day. She stopped at the boundary. The trees were very close here, close enough to reach out and touch the nearest trunk if she took one step. The forest breathed against her face, cold and pine-sharp and deeply still. From somewhere inside it she could hear the pack, distant and moving, the sound of them like something heard from underwater. "You're near the restricted boundary," said a voice behind her. She turned. The young guard from her first morning stood 10 feet back, his posture easy, but his attention fully on her. He did not seem angry. He seemed like someone carrying out a task he had been given, and was choosing to do it politely. "I'm not going in," she said. "I'm just standing here." "The boundary itself is restricted after dark," he said. "Alpha's standing order." He seemed genuinely sorry about this. "Fair enough," she said. She stepped back. "What's in there?" He was quiet for a moment. "The dead grove," he said. "Old forest. Alpha keeps it closed." "Why?" He thought about it honestly. "I don't know," he said. "I just follow the order." She nodded and turned back toward the house. The guard fell in a few paces behind her, without being asked, which she respected. It was a small kindness to not make her feel watched from a distance. Inside, the kitchen was lit low and smelled of the evening's cooking. Alara filled the kettle. She was standing at the counter when she heard a sound at the kitchen doorway and turned. Nadia stood there. She had a mug in both hands, and she had clearly expected the kitchen to be empty, because she went still when she saw Alara, and for a moment, Both of them were simply standing in the quiet kitchen looking at each other. Then Nadia walked in and set her mug on the counter and said, without looking at her, "I want you to know that I'm not angry at you personally." "All right," Ilara said. "But I am going to be honest with you about something." Nadia turned and looked at her directly. Her voice was measured and clear, the voice of someone who has decided that clarity is more honest than pretense. "What you are here is not what Aluna should be. The pack knows it, and I know it, and so do you, probably. And that matters, not because I'm saying it, because it's true." Ilara held her gaze steadily. "What do you think Aluna should be?" Nadia's answer came without hesitation. "Someone he chose." "I agree with you," Ilara said. Nadia stared at her. That was not what she had been braced for. "I think every alpha should have a true mate," Ilara said. She poured the water. "I think what's been arranged here is a solution to a practical problem, not an answer to anything real. And yes, I know that. I knew it when I signed the paper." She picked up her mug. "I'm not here to take anything from you or from anyone else. I'm here to do what I said I would do for 1 year. That's the whole of it." Nadia looked at her for a long time. What moved in her face then was something more complicated than the dismissal she had been showing until now. It was not warmth, but it was the beginning of something more honest than hostility. "You're strange," she said. "Probably," Ilara agreed. Nadia picked up her own mug and walked out without saying anything else. Ilara stood in the kitchen alone and drank her tea. She did not let herself feel too much about what had just happened. It was not a victory. It was an exchange, but something about it felt like the first solid ground she had found since arriving. She was about to go upstairs when the front door opened and closed, and she heard boots on the stone floor of the entry. A moment later, Darian came into the kitchen doorway. He was in his post-run state, still in his jacket, and she could feel the wolf in him more strongly than she had felt it through the walls or across a room. The shift lingered differently. She was not a fool. She understood the alpha force of him at this range, close and direct, like standing near a source of heat. He looked at the kettle, then at her. "Tea," he said, more observation than question. "I can make another cup if you want one," she said. He looked at the window. He looked at the counter. He looked like a man deciding whether wanting something was acceptable. "Sure," he said. She made a second cup. He sat at the corner of the kitchen table, not beside her, and not far from her, and wrapped both hands around the mug, and did not speak for several minutes. "Nadia was here," he said eventually. It was not a question. He must have caught the scent of the conversation, or something in the air of the room. "She was," Ilara said. "And we had an honest conversation," Ilara said, "which I think was more useful than the last 4 days." He looked at his mug. "She's been through a lot," he said. "The situation has complicated things that were already complicated." He stopped. Then, "The complications aren't your fault, and they're not your burden to carry." "I know," she said. "But I'm part of them now whether I want to be or not, so I'd rather deal with them directly." He raised his eyes to her. In the plain light of the kitchen, he looked different than he had in the study or the hall, less formally contained. The lines around his eyes were visible at this distance, the particular lines that come from years of something held very tightly for a very long time. She saw again, more clearly now, the tiredness she had glimpsed before. Not exhaustion, something older than exhaustion. "You're more practical than I expected," he said. "Is that a good thing?" "In this situation," he said, "yes." He finished the tea and stood. He was quiet for a moment at the doorway. Then, "Good night." "Good night," she said. She sat alone in the kitchen for a while after his footsteps faded. Outside the window, the pack grounds were empty and still. The forest at the far northern edge was dark and motionless under a sky full of cold stars. She pressed her hand against her chest. Below her ribs, the warmth was there, more present than the night before, a little more insistent, a little less like something waking up, and a little more like something that had been awake for some time, and was only now deciding to make itself known. She did not know what it meant. She did not know what was happening to her wolf, or why it had gone silent 3 years ago, or why it was stirring now in this place, rather than any other. But she was going to find out. She had decided that. She rinsed the mugs and turned off the kitchen light, and went upstairs to bed. The visiting delegation arrived on a Thursday morning, 8 wolves from the Ashford territory to the west, and the main house changed shape around them the way it always does when outsiders with authority enter a place. Alara knew they were coming, because Rowan had told her the night before. He had said, "Alpha Grant Ashford is here for a territorial boundary discussion. It's a formal visit. You'll be expected at the dinner tonight." He had paused. Ashford is not someone who makes things easy. She had noted that, and said nothing more about it. The Ashford delegation arrived mid-morning in 2 vehicles. Grant Ashford got out of the lead car first, and she saw him from the library window. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome at 30, and had since grown into something harder and more accustomed to being obeyed. He looked at the house with the particular expression of a man who is calculating everything he sees. The afternoon was taken up with formal meetings in the council room, from which Alara was excluded, appropriately and without comment. She used the time to finish reading the chapter on council structure she had started 2 days before, and to take a long walk around the perimeter of the grounds. She stayed away from the main buildings, while the Ashford wolves were moving through them. She was not hiding. She simply did not need to be somewhere she was not yet needed. The evening meal was formal. The great table in the hall was set for the full pack plus the 8 guests, and the atmosphere was the careful and slightly elevated atmosphere of wolves performing their hospitality with a pack they are not entirely at ease with. Darian sat at the head. Alara sat to his right. She had not been given any instruction about what to say or how to present herself. She had been given a time to arrive, and a seat assignment, and nothing else. She dressed carefully, not elaborately, and came down at the right time, and sat where she was supposed to sit. Grant Ashford sat to Darian's left. He was louder than she had expected, with the ease of a man who considers the room his wherever he is. He talked about territory, and about the spring boundary adjustments with the kind of casual authority that assumes full agreement before the other party has spoken. Darian listened and responded in the measured, flat way that she had come to recognize as his operating mode, giving nothing away, holding every card, watching for what was underneath the words, rather than the words themselves. It was partway through the second course that Grant turned to look at her directly for the first time. He had glanced at her twice before, in the way men glance at things they plan to come back to. Now he looked at her fully. "The Luna," he said. "I heard about the arrangement." His tone was the tone of a man delivering a verdict while pretending to make conversation. Unconventional, for a pack like this. "Most things worth doing are unconventional before they work," Alara said. Something sharpened in his eyes. He smiled, and the smile did not reach the rest of his face. "Spoken with confidence," he said. He looked at Darian. "What's her bloodline? I don't know the Voss name." "Her name is Alara," Darian said. His voice had not changed in pitch or speed. "And her bloodline is not a subject for the dinner table." Grant looked mildly amused. "I mean no offense. I'm simply curious. An alpha of your standing making this kind of arrangement. I assumed there was a strategic advantage beyond the obvious, unless the alliance itself was enough to justify." "The alliance and everything else about this arrangement is my business," Darian said. "Not a question I invited." The table had gone quieter. Not silent. People were still eating, still talking in smaller pairings. But the immediate vicinity had that particular quality of people paying close attention while appearing not to. Grant leaned back. He looked at Alara again, this time with less pretense of neutrality. "You must understand," he said to her, more quietly, as if the shift in volume made it more private when it did not, that in traditional pack culture, the Luna's role is a significant one. Wolves take it seriously. Wolves take the bond seriously. He turned his cup in his hand. A contracted position is unusual. Historically, packs that have tried it have had trouble with cohesion. The wolves lose faith in the Ashford, Darian said. Grant stopped. "I will say this once." Darian's voice was level and completely without temperature. "My Luna is my business. This pack's cohesion is my business. You were invited here to discuss the northern boundary, and I'll give you a full hearing on that tomorrow morning. Tonight, you are a guest at this table. I'd recommend behaving like one." The silence that followed was brief and total. Grant looked at Darian. He looked at Alara. Something shifted in his expression, a recalculation, and then he smiled again, this time with more ease, and turned the conversation back toward the boundary question, as if the last 3 minutes had not happened. Alara continued eating. She did not look at Darian. She did not let anything show in her face, but she felt what had just happened. felt the specific weight of it, an alpha who had no reason to defend her. Not contractually, not legally, not in terms of any obligation she had presented him with, choosing to do it anyway, not with heat, with precision, like a door closing. After the meal, while the guests were being shown to the guest quarters by Cora, Elara went up to the library. She needed quiet, and the library was the quietest room in the house. She sat at the table by the window and looked out at the dark grounds and tried to sort through the evening. She was still sitting there when the door opened. She expected Marin or Cora. It was Darian. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked at her with an expression she could not immediately read, which was unusual. She had become fairly good at reading his face. He came in and sat across the table. "You handled that well," he said. "You handled it," she said. "You didn't need me to," he said. "You were already managing him. I just finished it." She looked at him. The library was quiet around them, the window dark, the lamp on the table making the room small and close. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Whatever he said about me, it wasn't your problem to correct." He looked at the table. "Yes," he said, "it was." He said it simply, like a man stating a fact he has already made up his mind about. "Whatever this arrangement is, you're here as Luna. That's how it works. If someone disrespects that position at my table, I respond to it." She looked at him for a moment. "Is that all it is? The position?" He met her eyes, and there was a pause, one breath long, in which something shifted behind his face, that she almost caught, and then it was closed again. "It's the position," he said. She nodded. She looked back at the window. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, less formally, "Cassian spoke to Edmund after dinner. I don't know what was said. I'll find out tomorrow." He was watching the exchange at the table very carefully, she said. Darian's eyes moved to her face. "You noticed that?" "I notice things," she said simply. He was quiet for another moment. She could feel him deciding something. Then he said, "My mate's name was Lyra. She died 4 years ago. We had felt the bond beginning. It had not fully formed." He said it without inflection, without rehearsal in the words, the way you say something you have already processed into a fact, because feelings you cannot do anything with have to be converted into facts eventually. "After that, I stopped believing the bond would come again. It was a choice, to stop believing it. I made that choice because believing in something that isn't coming costs more than I wanted to spend." She was very still. She understood why he was telling her this. Not for sympathy, for honesty. Because she had given him honesty, and this was the fair return for it. "I'm sorry," she said. "About Lyra." He nodded once. "I'm telling you because you asked a fair question about what tonight was. And the honest answer is that it was both things. The position and—" He stopped. He looked at the table. "This arrangement is complicated enough, without me adding to it. But I wanted you to understand why I made it. You made it because the alternative was spending another 4 years waiting for something you'd decided wasn't going to come," she said. He looked at her. "Yes. I understand that," she said quietly. They sat in silence for a while. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that happens between people who have both said something real and are letting it settle without rushing past it. When he left, he said good night, and she said good night, and the exchange was the same as always in its words but different in the weight underneath them. She sat in the library alone after he was gone, and pressed her fingers to the table, and thought about the word complicated, and about a man who had lost something irreplaceable, and had responded by removing his own expectations, so nothing could be taken from him again. She understood that too. She was more familiar with that particular strategy than she would have liked. The wolves were called Felix and Owen. They were both in their mid-20s, and they ran the Northern Patrol together, a route that ran along the edge of the Dead Grove boundary, and circled back to the eastern fence. They were expected back at the main house by noon. By 2 o'clock they had not returned. By 2:30 Rowan came to find her in the library. His face was careful and controlled, which meant he was concerned. He said, "2 patrol wolves are late returning, probably nothing, but the Alpha is putting together a search team. Stay in the house." "All right," she said. She stayed in the house for 20 minutes. Then she put on her jacket and went out the back door. She did not go toward the search team, which was moving down the eastern path in a fast, organized group. She went toward the north. The same pull she had been feeling since she arrived was there, stronger than it had been any previous day, specific now, rather than general, like a thread pulled taut between her chest and a point inside those trees. The guard at the north boundary was gone. He had joined the search team. The boundary itself was just a tree line now, dark pines pressing close together, undergrowth thick below them. She went in. The first thing she noticed was the sound. The forest sounds changed almost immediately after she crossed the tree line. The birds that had been present at the edges were gone. The wind that moved through the clear land outside did not seem to enter here. The trees were so tall and so densely growing that they changed the quality of the light, filtering it into something older and more green, and the air below the canopy was still and cool, and carried a weight she recognized from certain very old places, the weight of something that has been here longer than anything nearby and knows it. She moved without hurrying. She did not know where she was going in any cognitive sense. She was following the pull, which had stopped being mysterious about its nature, and had become simply a direction, clear as a compass needle, swinging and holding. The forest floor was soft, and gave slightly underfoot. The trees grew massive here, their trunks wider than she could have reached around, the bark deeply ridged and black at the base. She passed a clearing, where the canopy thinned, and pale light came down in a column, and lit the ground below it, and she almost stopped there, because there was something in that light, something she could not name, but the pull was not there, and she moved on. She heard them before she saw them, a low sound, not a voice exactly, more the sound of effort, and then Owen's voice, tight with pain, saying something short. She found them in a shallow depression between two of the largest trees she had seen yet. The ground had given way beneath them, an old underground den of some kind, the earth overhead collapsing inward, and they had gone down with it. They were both in the depression, Felix sitting up against the earthen wall with blood on his leg, Owen flat on his back with his arm braced at an awkward angle. "Are you both here?" she said, dropping to her knees at the edge. Owen looked up at her. His face went through several expressions in quick succession: relief, confusion, something embarrassed. "How did you find us?" he said. "Never mind that," she said. "Can you move your arm?" "Yes," he said, and then moved it and hissed through his teeth. "Maybe." "Don't," she said. "Felix. The leg." "Deep cut," Felix said. He was holding it with both hands, and the color in his face was bad, but his voice was controlled. "We need to shift to heal. Can't shift down here. Not enough space." "I know," she said. "I'm going to get you out. How far down are you?" 6 feet, maybe 7, Owen said. She looked at the walls of the depression. The earth was soft but not crumbling actively. The base of one of the big trees was at the edge, the roots going deep below. She found the sturdiest root and gripped it. "Felix first," she said. "Push with your good leg. I'll pull." It took 10 minutes. Felix was heavier than he looked, and he could not help much with the injured leg. She braced her feet against the ground and pulled steadily, and when he got close to the top, she gripped his jacket and hauled, and he came over the edge and lay on his back, breathing hard. She was going back for Owen when she heard movement in the trees behind her. Fast movement, more than one person. Darian came through the trees first, with Rowan 2 steps behind, and 2 other wolves after that. He saw Felix on the ground. He saw the depression. His eyes moved to her. For 1 second she saw something in his face that was not anger and not relief. It was something older and more violent, a thing that came up fast from somewhere deep and hit the surface of his expression before he could control it. Then he stepped toward the depression, and she moved aside, and he went to the edge, and Owen looked up and said, "Alpha." And Darian reached down with one hand, and something shifted in the air around him. She felt it like a pressure change, the wolf in him surging up hard, too hard. Breaking through the layer of control, he kept it behind. He went still. His hand was still extended toward Owen, but his body had locked, and she could see, from 2 feet away, the way his jaw set, and his breathing changed, and his eyes lost a specific quality of presence that they normally held. "Darian," she said. He did not respond. She said his name again, not louder, the same volume, just differently. She had learned to do that years ago, to use a name like a hand placed on someone's shoulder, rather than a word called across a distance. He turned his head very slightly in her direction. The wolf in him was massive and present, She could feel it from here, the full alpha force of it pushing against his skin. But he turned his head. "Let Rowan get him," she said. "You don't have to." "I'm fine," he said. His voice came out wrong. Too low, too even, the voice of someone managing something with the last of their available attention. "I know you are," she said. "But Rowan is right here, and Owen is fine, and Felix is fine. They're both fine." Rowan stepped around him smoothly, and reached down for Owen without comment. He got him up and over the edge in less than a minute. Owen lay on the ground beside Felix, and immediately started shifting, the wolf taking over the work of healing, and the sound and smell of it was the ordinary smell and sound of a wolf doing what wolves do. Darian stood at the edge of the depression with his back to her. His breathing was audible. She did not speak to him again. She waited. After a minute, his shoulders dropped a fraction, and something that had been wound very tight in the air around him began to ease. He turned around. He looked at her. His face was back, fully back now, the controlled and flat expression she knew. But she had seen what came before it, and she had felt it, and she understood, with a clarity that ran straight through her without stopping, exactly what had happened here. He had been here before. Not this exact place, but this shape of moment. Someone down, unreachable. And the wolf in him, going so hard he could not manage both the crisis and the control at the same time. "Thank you," he said. The words were quiet, and came from somewhere genuine. "They're going to be fine," she said. "Felix will need stitches. Owen's arm will take a few days to fully heal, but it isn't broken." He nodded. He looked at the two wolves on the ground, and watched them for a moment, his face still, and his eyes doing something she could not fully read. The walk back was quiet. Rowan and the others supported Felix and Owen. She walked beside Darian, not speaking, because she understood without having to think about it that speaking was not what was needed. She had learned from her mother that sometimes the thing a person needs is not words but presence, the quality of being beside someone without requiring them to manage that. He walked the whole way, with his hands at his sides, and his pace steady, and his face closed. At the edge of the forest, stepping back into the clear land, he stopped. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. He said it without heat, like a man finishing an accounting. "Yes," she said. "You went into restricted territory." "Yes." He looked at the house in the middle distance. "You found them before the search team." "The pull toward the grove was pointing that direction," she said. "I followed it." He turned his head and looked at her sideways. Something moved in his face that was not quite the flat expression, and not quite the thing she had seen at the edge of the depression. Something in between, something that did not have a name yet, but was real. "Don't do that again without telling me first," he said. "I'll tell you if there's time," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the house, and she walked beside him, and neither of them said anything else. That evening, sitting in her room with her mother's journal in her hands but not yet open, she thought about what she had felt in the forest, not the pull, which she was beginning to be able to hold in her mind as a real thing rather than an oddity. Not the scene with Felix and Owen, which had been frightening and then resolved and could be set in its proper place. But the moment at the edge of the depression, the second she had said his name and he had turned his head, and the wolf in him had responded to her voice, the way a wolf responds to something it recognizes. She had not done anything. She had simply been there. And he had come back from the edge of losing himself. She put the journal on the desk without opening it. She was not ready for it tonight. She turned off the light and lay in the dark and felt the warmth below her ribs, present and steady and, she was beginning to think, not random at all. She was in the space between sleeping and waking when the figure appeared. It was not a dream in the ordinary sense. She knew she was in her bed in the Blackthorn house. She could feel the mattress and the weight of the blanket. But in that same knowing she was also somewhere else. A wide and white space that had no walls and no floor she could feel, but that was entirely real, in the way only certain things that happen in near sleep are real. The figure was made of light, not the bright, painful kind, the softer kind, the kind that has no single source but comes from everywhere at once, and has been present so long that everything it touches has learned to live by it. There was a shape within the light. Female. Vast in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. The kind of vastness that you feel in the presence of very old things, mountains and deep water and forests, that have stood since before anyone began counting the years. The figure said her name, once, then twice, then a third time. Her name in that voice was not just sound, it was something pressed into her, warm and specific and terrifyingly precise. She woke up. The room was dark and she was breathing too fast, and she pressed both hands flat on her chest. Below her ribs, the warmth was not a warmth anymore. It was something more present and more urgent, a light pressing hard against the inside of her, not painful, but insistent, in the way of something that has been patient for a long time and is done with patience. She got out of bed and went to the small mirror above the desk. Her eyes were silver. Not bright silver, not permanent. Even as she watched, the color was fading back to her natural brown, like light going out of a room. But it had been there. For 5-6 seconds, solid and undeniable. Silver light in her own eyes. She sat down on the edge of the bed and put both hands between her knees and took very careful, very controlled breaths until her heart slowed to something manageable. Then she got dressed. It was 5 in the morning. She did not care. She walked down the east hall and knocked on Marin's door. The healer opened it quickly, as if she had not been asleep, and looked at Ilara for exactly 1 second before stepping back to let her in. Marin's room was warm and smelled of dried herbs and something older she could not identify. There was a fire going low in the small hearth, 2 chairs beside it. Marin sat in one and gestured to the other without speaking, and Ilara sat down. "Tell me," Marin said. Ilara told her everything. The 3 years of stillness, the way her shift had stopped working before it stopped entirely, the pull toward the dead grove, the warmth below her ribs, the figure made of light in the space between sleeping and waking, the silver in her eyes that had lasted 6 seconds and then gone. Marin listened with complete attention and complete stillness, the kind of stillness that is not passive but active, the way a healer listens when she is cataloging everything she hears against everything she already knows. When Ilara finished, Marin was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I knew your mother." Ilara went still. "Sarah Voss came to me 26 years ago," Marin said, "before you were born. She was young, and she was frightened, and she had just understood something about herself that she needed help making sense of. She looked at the fire. She came to me because I was already old then, and I had studied things that most healers don't study, things from the oldest records, things that most people in our world don't bother with because they seem too rare to be practical." "What did she come to you about?" Ilara asked. Her voice was steady. She was making it be steady. "Something called the moon mark," Marin said. "Your mother believed she carried it, and she was right." She explained it slowly and precisely, because it was not a simple thing, and she did not want to give Ilara a version of it that was easier than the truth. The moon mark was not a gift that arrived in adulthood. It was something older than that, something the moon goddess placed in certain bloodlines before birth, sealed inside the child like a seed inside stone, waiting for conditions that might not come for decades. The sealed part was not simply power in the usual sense. It was a wolf, a specific and particular wolf, not the natural wolf spirit that every shifted wolf carried, but something given by the divine, carrying in its nature something that no ordinary wolf carried. "Why was it sealed?" Ilara asked. "Because if it emerged before the carrier was ready," Marin said, "the carrier would be overwhelmed by it, not destroyed, necessarily, but unmoored, unable to be in the world in any stable way. The seal existed to protect the person from the power, until the person was strong enough and grounded enough to hold it." She paused. Sarah understood this. She was afraid for you specifically, because she had a gift for sensing what was coming. She sensed her own death, not the shape of it, but the fact of it, and she did not want you to lose her, and to lose the seal at the same time, because both of those together might be more than a child could survive. "So she strengthened it," Ilara said slowly, "before she died." "Yes," Marin said. "She came to me again, 2 weeks before the accident on the ridge. She did not tell me she was going to die. She told me she was worried about you. She sealed the wolf more deeply than it had been sealed before. The sealing was an act of protection, an act of love." Ilara looked at the fire. The words had landed in her like stones into deep water, and she was following the ripples of them, without knowing yet where the bottom was. "The journal," she said. "My mother's journal." "What about it?" I've been carrying it for 6 years without reading it. She looked up. I think she left something in it. Marin looked at her with quiet certainty. Yes, she said. I think she did. Ilara went back to her room and sat at the desk with the journal in both hands. It was an ordinary notebook, hard-covered, the edges soft from years in her bag. Her mother's handwriting filled it in careful rows, the letters small and precise, because Sarah Voss had always believed in using the space you were given efficiently. She opened it to the beginning and read. The first entries were ordinary. Daily things, observations, small notes about the pack and the territory and the weather. Her mother had a gift for precise description. Reading her words was like standing beside her in the places she described. The creek in the early morning, the way the pack gathered at the end of a hard training day, the particular sound of the forest at dusk. Then, perhaps a third of the way through, the entries changed. Sarah wrote about what she had felt since Ilara was born, the way the seal had been present in her daughter from the very beginning, visible to a mother who knew what to look for, a specific quality of light in the child's wolf spirit that was different from other wolves. She wrote about her fear, and about her wonder, and about the decision she had made when she felt her own end coming, how she had gone to Marin, and how she had done what she could to protect the seal. And then, near the end, she had written something directly to Ilara, not a journal entry, a letter, in different ink, as if she had gone back to the notebook after the rest was already written, and added it. My Ilara. If you are reading this, you have found your way somewhere the seal is ready to open. The seal cannot hold forever. It is not meant to. It was only meant to hold until you were strong enough, and until you had found the thing that unmakes walls, the thing that makes you present in the world in a way that is larger than survival. I cannot tell you what that thing is, because I don't know what form it will take for you. For me it was a place and a set of people, and the particular feeling of belonging to something bigger than myself. For you it may be different. What I can tell you is this: do not be afraid of what is inside you. I sealed it to protect you, not to hide it from you. It is yours. It has always been yours. And when it comes, it will not break you. You are already strong enough for it. You have been strong enough for a long time. I know because I know you. I love you. I have always loved you. And I have never stopped. Ilara put the journal down on the desk. She sat in the chair for a long time without moving. The warmth below her ribs was steady and present, and she did not try to quiet it or manage it. She sat with it. She was still sitting there when a knock came at her door in the late afternoon. She opened it to find Darian in the corridor. He looked at her face, and something in his own face shifted. Barely but perceptibly. You've been here since morning, he said. Cora noticed you didn't come down. I'm fine, she said. I had something to read. He looked at the journal on the desk. He looked at her again. Do you want company, or do you want to be left alone? The question was so direct, and so free of any attempt to be needed, that she almost smiled. Company, she said, if you're not busy. He came in and sat in the chair by the window, and she sat at the desk, and he picked up a book from the shelf by the window, one of the narrow history volumes that had been left there, and he read, and she sat with her thoughts, and neither of them required anything from the other, and an hour passed in that way. When he finally stood to leave, he said, Whatever you read today, you don't have to tell me, but whatever it was, it's going to be all right. She looked at him. How do you know that? I don't, he said, but you're still here. And you're steady. That usually means it's going to be all right. He left. She sat alone and turned the journal over in her hands and thought about walls and the things that unmake them. And she could not have explained what woke her, only that it did. She lay in the dark with her eyes open for a moment and then got up, put on her jacket, and went downstairs. It was past midnight. The house was quiet in the way of a sleeping pack, the particular silence of many people resting in their animal nature, deep and slow and complete. She did not know why she went outside. The pull was different from what it had been in the daytime, less specific about direction, and more like a general restlessness in her chest. She went out the back door and crossed the quiet grounds and walked along the far edge of the eastern buildings, where the outbuildings stood in a row with their lights off. She was passing the old meeting hall, the one she had clocked on her first day as a building she couldn't identify, when she heard the voice. Low, careful, Cassian's voice, unmistakable in its dry precision, coming from inside through a window that was open 2 inches at the bottom. She stopped. She was in the shadow of the building's side, invisible from the window. She stood absolutely still. There was a second voice, faint, tinny, the distortion of a phone call on speaker. She could not catch every word. She caught enough. She caught Grant. She caught counsel. She caught the phrase, the traditional argument, and the phrase, enough votes, and then something about timing, specifically the blood moon, which was 11 days away. She pressed her back to the wall of the building and made herself breathe slowly and let the words come in without reaction. What she understood by the time the voices stopped, by the time the window closed and the light inside went off, was this. Cassian was working with Grant Ashford. The channel between them was older than the visit last week. They had been in contact before, and they were moving towards something that had to do with the council, with a vote, with the blood moon as a deadline. She stood in the dark for a long time after the sound stopped. Then she went back to bed. She did not sleep. The next day she was careful. She said nothing. She moved through the ordinary hours of the day with the same steadiness she always presented. Meals and the library and a walk in the afternoon. And she watched Cassian with the particular attentiveness of someone who knows what they're looking for and is careful not to look like they know. She saw the way he spoke to Edmund after breakfast, the particular position of his body, turned slightly away from the room so only Edmund could see his face. She saw the way he watched Darian from across the council room during a brief meeting she passed in the corridor. She saw, in the late afternoon, him going back to the old meeting hall alone, with a folder in his hand. That night she went back. The window on the far side was latched this time. She walked the building's perimeter. At the south end, behind a drain pipe, there was a smaller window, older, with a latch that had been painted over so many times it didn't quite seat properly. She worked it with 2 fingers, and it opened without force. She went in. The building was 2 rooms. The outer room held a long table and chairs, nothing on the walls, the kind of neutral space used for meetings with outsiders. The inner room was different. There was a desk, and a locked cabinet, and a shelf with several binders on it. A wastepaper bin beside the desk, with a crumpled sheet of paper in it that she smoothed and read, and then put back exactly as she had found it. The cabinet was locked. The desk drawers were not. In the second drawer she found a folder. She opened it. Inside were 12 pages. She did not take the folder. She took the lamp from the desk and read by it, carefully, turning the pages slowly, so she would not disarrange them. The pages were a mixture of documents. 3 were printed letter exchanges between Cassian and an address she did not recognize but could note. 2 were copies of Blackthorn Council meeting minutes, annotated in the margins, in a handwriting she did not recognize yet, with comments like, insufficient support, and must move before the blood moon, or delay by full lunar cycle. 4 pages were a formal document she had to read twice before she fully understood it. It was a challenge petition, structured according to old pack law, which allowed any council elder to initiate a formal challenge to an alpha's leadership on grounds of deviation from pack values, if the petition carried a minimum of 2 elder signatures plus supporting evidence. The petition cited Darian's decision to bring in a contractual Luna as the primary evidence of deviation. It cited the pack's supposed loss of confidence in his leadership. It cited the precedent of 3 historical cases. It had 2 signatures, Cassian's, and below it, in the handwriting she had not recognized in the margin notes, a second signature, Edmund. She put the pages back precisely as they had been. She replaced the lamp. She went back out through the side window. She was 10 feet from the building when a hand closed around her wrist. She did not make a sound. She turned. Rowan stood behind her in the dark, still, one hand on her wrist and his face very carefully neutral. They looked at each other for 4 full seconds. "Let me guess," he said quietly. "You heard something last night." "Yes," she said. "And tonight you went in to look." "Yes." He released her wrist. He looked at the building. Then he said, "I've been watching Cassian for 3 weeks." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I had pieces of it. Not enough. Tell me what you found." She told him. All of it. The voices through the window the night before. The pages in the folder tonight. The letter exchanges. The council minutes with their margin notes. The challenge petition. When she finished, Rowan was quiet for 10 seconds that felt much longer. Then he said, "Edmund's signature." "Yes," she said. He pressed one hand over his mouth briefly. Then he lowered it, and his expression was controlled again. "All right," he said. "We go to Darien now." "It's 1 in the morning," she said. "Yes," he said, and turned toward the house. Darien opened his study door within 30 seconds of the knock, which told her he had not been asleep. He took in Rowan's face, and her face, and stepped back to let them in. She told him clearly, and without embellishment. She gave him the facts in order, the voice through the window, the decision to look, the documents, and Edmund's signature. She did not editorialize. She did not tell him how she felt about any of it. He listened to all of it without moving, and without expression. When she finished, he looked at the wall behind her for a long moment, and what moved in his face was something she had not seen there before. It was not rage. It was something colder, and more final. He looked at Rowan. "Edmund," he said. "I don't think Edmund was a willing part of it," Rowan said carefully. "I think his signature was obtained by means he doesn't fully understand yet." "The forged annotation in the margins," Elara said. "The handwriting on the petition didn't match what I saw in the margin notes. Cassian annotated the council minutes himself, and mixed them in to look like corroborating material." Darien looked at her. "You noticed that?" "I compare handwriting," she said simply. "Force of habit." He was quiet again. Then, "Thank you. Both of you. Go to bed. I want you in the study at 7 tomorrow morning." Rowan nodded. He went to the door. Elara followed. "Elara," Darien said. She turned. "What you did tonight took a real risk," he said. "And I want you to know that I know that." He said it plainly, without ceremony. "The risk was yours, and you took it. That matters." She held his gaze. "I live here," she said. "This pack is my responsibility too for as long as I'm here. What happened to Felix and Owen in the Grove? What Cassian is doing to this council? None of it stops mattering just because I'm here on a contract." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face and she could not quite name it. It was not the tiredness she had seen before. It was something more awake. "No," he said. "It doesn't." She went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about Edmund's signature on that petition, and about Cassian's voice through the window, careful and low, and completely certain of itself. She thought about the way Darien had looked at her when she said, "This pack is my responsibility too." She was not sure when she had started meaning that, but she had meant it when she said it. The warmth below her ribs pressed steady and present, and she let it, and she slept. The council meeting was called for 9 o'clock. Not the small table in Darien's study, but the formal council room on the ground floor, with the long oak table, and the 3 chairs on the elder side, and the alpha's chair at the head. Elara was not supposed to be there. Elara was not supposed to be there. The council meetings were closed, but Darien said to her at 7 in the morning, after she and Rowan had spent 2 hours with him going through every detail of what she had found, "Stay. You found it. You should be there when it's answered." Edmund and Aldrich arrived together. Edmund was a tall, thin man with a steady face and white hair, the kind of elder whose authority came from decades of being right about the important things. Aldrich was heavier and quieter, with a way of sitting that made him look like part of the furniture until he spoke. Both of them looked at Elara with mild surprise when they saw her in the room, and then at Darien, and then they sat down. Cassian arrived last. He walked in with the pace and bearing of a man who had done nothing wrong and knew it, the particular carriage of someone who has carefully arranged for that to be true in every way that can be checked. He looked at the table. He looked at Elara. His expression did not change, which was itself a kind of change, a decision made just below the surface. He sat down. Darien put the pages on the table. He placed them in the center, where everyone could see them, and he said nothing. Edmund leaned forward and read the first page. His face went through 3 expressions in 5 seconds. Then he read the second page. "This is the petition," he said. His voice was careful. "Yes," Darien said. Edmund looked at the bottom of the page. He looked at his own signature. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at Cassian. "I did not sign this," he said. Cassian looked at the page. "Your signature is there, Edmund." "I know what my signature looks like," Edmund said. His voice had gone flat and cold. "I have written my name for 62 years. I know what it looks like, and I know that I did not sign that document." Aldrich reached across and looked at the signature. He looked at it, and then at the annotated council minutes, and then at the handwriting in the margins. He sat back. He said nothing, but his face said everything. Darian said, "The annotation in the margin of the council minutes is in your hand, Cassian. I've compared it to 3 other documents you've written in the last 2 months." He placed 3 more pages on the table, meeting notes from recent sessions, all in the same spare and precise hand. The signature on the petition was copied from a document Edmund signed in the spring records. "I found the original in the archive this morning." Cassian looked at the pages. He looked at them with the composed expression of a man who is deciding which version of what is happening he can afford to give weight to. Then he looked at Darian. "The pack is struggling," he said. He did not deny it. He chose a different path instead, the path of a man who believes that his reasons justify his methods. "You know that. The arrangement you made has cost us confidence we cannot easily rebuild. I was protecting what I have given 40 years to build." "By forging a council elder's signature," Darian said. "By doing what was necessary," Cassian said, "as I have always done." Edmund stood. He stood slowly, the way old men stand when they are certain of what they are doing, and are not going to hurry it. "You forged my name," he said. "You forged my name on a document designed to remove this alpha from his position. You did this without my knowledge, without my consent, and in my name." He looked at Cassian with the particular clarity of a man who has been disappointed by someone he had not expected to be disappointed by. "I have known you for 35 years. Cassian looked at him. Something shifted in his expression, the first real thing to move in it since he sat down. Not regret exactly. Something more complicated than regret. "I knew you wouldn't agree," he said. "I knew it. But I also knew I was right." "You knew I wouldn't agree," Edmund repeated. "So, you made the decision for me." He sat back down. He folded his hands on the table. "You have disqualified yourself, Cassian, by every standard of this council, by every standard of this pack." Darian was already standing. He said, "Elder Cassian, your rank on this council is withdrawn, effective immediately. You are confined to your quarters pending a full council judgment on your future in this territory." He looked at the 2 guards standing by the door, who had been there since the meeting began. "Take him." Cassian stood. He looked at Darian for a long moment. He looked at Alara. His expression toward her was not hatred. It was something stranger, the particular look of a man who has realized that the variable he dismissed was the one that undid everything. He left between the 2 guards. The door closed. The council room was quiet for a moment. Aldrich said, "Edmund, I'm sorry." Edmund waved a hand. "I'm not the one who was wronged." He looked at Darian. "I want you to know that I did not know." "I know you didn't," Darian said. "I never thought you did." Edmund looked at Alara. "You found the documents," he said. "Yes," she said. He studied her for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you," in the simple and direct way that very old people say important things, without ceremony, because they have learned that ceremony often takes the place of meaning rather than adding to it. She nodded once. The meeting closed. The day moved forward, carefully and quietly, the pack absorbing what it was only beginning to understand had happened. Word spread the way it always spreads in a pack, not through announcement, but through the particular vibration of a pack's shared awareness, the way a change in the territory feels in your chest, before you have been told about it in words. Alara spent the afternoon in the library. She was not hiding. She was giving the pack space to absorb the news without her being visibly present in it, which felt like the more useful thing to do. At some point in the early evening she gave up the pretense of reading, and just sat with her thoughts. Marin came in at dusk and sat across from her, and did not ask how she was, which was one of the reasons Alara had come to appreciate her. "The pack is steadier than I expected," Marin said. "A crisis with a clear resolution is easier to metabolize than a slow uncertainty. They know what happened, and they know it was answered." "Do they know all of it?" Alara asked. "Enough," Marin said. "They know Cassian was removed and why. They know you were part of finding it." She looked at Alara steadily. "Some of them are revising their understanding of you." "Some," Alara said. "It takes time," Marin said, "but the direction has changed." That night the kitchen was quiet when she came down late. She went to the stove and put the kettle on. She was standing at the counter, listening to the water begin to heat, when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Darian came in. He looked at the kettle. He said nothing, and sat at the corner of the table. She made 2 cups. They sat for a while without talking. The kitchen was warm, and the hour was late, and the house around them was completely still. "Are you all right?" she asked. Not a social question, a real one. He turned the cup in his hands. "I've known Cassian my whole life," he said. "He was on the council when my father was Alpha. He sat in the chair at my left hand for 6 years. He paused. "I trusted him in the way you trust the things that have always been present. The things that have been there so long, they feel like part of the structure." He looked at the cup. "I was wrong to trust like that. I should have been watching." "You were running a pack," she said. "You can't watch everything." "I should have watched him." "Yes," she said. "But you didn't. And now you know, and it's been answered. That's not the same as being foolish. That's being human." He looked at her. Something in his face was different tonight, less composed, the kind of open expression that surfaces late at night in kitchens, when there is no audience, and the day has stripped the usual arrangements away. "You're better at this than I expected," he said. Not a compliment exactly, more like an observation made out loud that he might not have made in the daytime. "Better at what?" she asked. "At being here," he said. "At being in the middle of things. At not flinching." She looked at her tea. "I've had practice," she said. "My mother died when I was 18. My pack spent 2 years after that in a difficult transition. I learned that flinching doesn't save anything. You might as well be present." "Your mother," he said. "Was she like you?" "I think so," she said. "I've been reading her journal. She was more patient than me. Steadier, maybe. But the way she thought about things..." She stopped. "Yes, she was like me." He was quiet for a moment. "But then, Lyra was not like me at all," he said. He said it the way you say something you have been holding for a long time, and are finally letting out. "She was warm and quick, and she made everything she touched lighter. I was serious, and she laughed at me for it, and I didn't mind." He stopped. He looked at the table. "After she was gone, I decided that warmth was what I couldn't afford anymore. Because things that made you warm also made you something that could be hurt." "I know that decision," Ilara said quietly. He looked at her. "Not the same reason," she said, "but the same logic." She held the cup. "Warmth costs something, so you stop running it, and you become more efficient." "Yes," he said. "The problem," she said, "is that you also become more alone." He was quiet. "I'm not saying it was wrong," she said. "I made the same choice for 3 years. I'm just saying, it has a cost that accumulates." He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was very quiet. The house was asleep around them. Outside, the night was still. "Ilara," he said, her name in his voice, said that way, with that particular quiet weight, was different from the way he had said it before. "Yes," she said. He seemed to decide not to say what he had started to say. He looked down at his cup. "Good night," he said instead. "Good night," she said. He left. She sat in the kitchen alone for a long time after, with the warmth below her ribs steady and present, and no longer uncertain about itself. 8 days before the blood moon, something changed in the air. She felt it in the night first, a pressure that built slowly from somewhere far below sleep and pressed upward through her dreams, without waking her. She felt it in the morning when she stood in the east yard, and the light on the pack grounds looked different from the day before, slightly brighter, slightly more charged, the way light looks before a storm that is still a long way off. She felt it most clearly in the thing below her ribs, which was no longer a warmth that came and went, but a presence that was simply there, constant and undeniable, pressing with a growing urgency against the boundary she had always understood as herself. Her wolf was awake. Not the way a wolf is awake after a shift or before a run. Awake the way something wakes when it has been asleep for a very long time and is not going to sleep again. On the 5th day before the blood moon, she was standing at the edge of the training field, watching the afternoon drills, when Lena ran a speed line close by and pulled up hard and stared at her. "Your eyes," Lena said. "I know," Ilara said. "There." Lena stopped. She was staring at Ilara's face, with an expression that was not fear, but was close to the thing that lives beside fear. "Silver. It fades," Ilara said. Lena stared for another second, and then called out to Felix, who was running a parallel line 20 feet away. Felix looked. His pace broke. He came over slowly, and he looked at her face the same way Lena had, and then his expression went somewhere between careful and reverent, and she was not entirely sure which. "What is that?" Felix said. "Something that's been sealed for a long time," she said. "It's coming undone." They looked at each other over her head, some private exchange, and then both of them looked back at her, and neither of them said anything else, but neither of them walked away either. Word spread the way it always spread in the pack. By evening she could feel it in how the room changed when she entered it, the quality of the attention different now, less the calculated wariness she had been living with since she arrived, and more something she did not have a precise word for. Something older, something more animal. Darian called her to the study the next morning. He looked at her for a moment after she sat down, the same long and direct look she had learned to meet without flinching. "Tell me what is happening," he said, not an accusation. "A request," she told him. All of it, fully this time, not the edited version she had been offering in pieces. The 3 years of her wolf being still and wrong and unreachable. Marin's explanation of the moon mark and what it was, her mother's journal, and the letter inside it. What the seal was, and what was causing it to break now. He listened the way he always listened, completely and without interrupting, processing as she went. When she finished, he said, "What happens when it breaks fully?" "I don't know," she said. "Marin says it will happen at the blood moon. She says my wolf will be fully present after that, in a way it hasn't been since I was a child." "And before the blood moon?" "The in-between state," she said. "The seal weakening but not open. The eyes. The pressure." She touched her chest. "It feels like something inside a bottle that is too large for the bottle." He looked at her steadily. "Are you frightened?" She thought about it honestly, because he deserved honesty. "No," she said, "not of the wolf. I've been frightened of it for 3 years, but I understand now why it went quiet, and I understand what it is, and I don't think I need to be afraid of it." She paused. "I'm more frightened of what happens after, of what it changes." "What do you think it changes?" "I don't know," she said. "That's the frightening part." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Marin told me something this morning. She told me the moonmark wolf is visible to other wolves on some level, even before it breaks fully. That it's already been changing how the pack reads you." He looked at her. "That may be part of why the ground has been shifting." She had noticed the shift. The quality of the pack's attention had been changing for days, well before the silver eyes were visible. Something in how they moved around her, something in the space they left. "Marin thinks so too," she said. "Then we need to be ready for what comes when it breaks," he said. "Not panic, practicality. What do you need?" The question was so clean and direct that she almost didn't know what to do with it. Nobody had asked her that in a long time. "Space," she said, "and not to be watched by half the pack when it happens." He looked at the window. He looked back at her. "Tonight," he said, "after the pack has eaten. Come with me." She looked at him. "I want to take you into the grove," he said. She went still. "You've kept it restricted since you became alpha." "I know," he said, "but I know what it is now, and I think you need to be there." He said it the way he said things that were decided, flat and certain, not a hypothesis. "It's where this should happen. I don't know how I know that. I just do." She nodded. That evening, she ate dinner with the pack, and she felt the attention of them in a way that was no longer uncomfortable, only present. She met their eyes when they looked at her. She saw in some of them a new quality of regard, not yet warmth but something like readiness, the particular expression of wolves who are recalibrating what they know. After the meal, when the hall had begun to empty, Darian came to where she was standing. He said nothing. He walked toward the back door. She followed. The guard at the north boundary stepped aside before Darian reached him, the particular smooth step-aside of a wolf who has received his alpha's wordless instruction and is carrying it out. The tree line opened. They went in. The dead grove at night was nothing like she had imagined. She had been in it once before, in the daylight and under pressure, looking for Felix and Owen, and she had noted its quality then, the age of it, the weight of it. At night it was different, in the same way a familiar room is different when the lights are out. Not unrecognizable, only more itself. The trees were enormous, their branches locked overhead, and the moon came through, only in thin, silver-edged snurps that lay across the forest floor in lines. The undergrowth was still, and the air was so cold and so still It was almost a presence itself. She could feel the grove around her, the way you feel a large, quiet room, its whole shape apparent even in the dark. They walked without speaking. She did not know where he was leading her. She did not ask. The center of the grove was a clearing that should not have been there. The trees were too densely grown elsewhere for this much open sky. And yet here was a circle of sky overhead, the moon directly above it, the light coming down in a column that was silver and bright, and older than the trees around it. The ground in the clearing was covered in a low, fine moss, deep green even at night, and the air in it was different from the air outside it, warmer and more charged, the charge of something that has been gathering for a very long time. She stepped into the clearing and stopped. She did not choose what happened next. There was no choice made. One moment she was standing in the clearing, with the moonlight on her, and the grove around her and Darian 3 steps behind. And the next moment, the seal broke. It opened the way her mother's letter had described it opening. Like a door, like something that had been waiting for the right key, and had finally felt it turn. There was a single moment of enormous pressure, a moment in which she could not breathe, and the world went completely white, and then the pressure resolved. Her wolf stepped out of her. Not in the way of shifting. She was still standing, still human, still entirely herself. But beside her, and around her, and through her, there was a wolf, enormous and white, and made entirely of light. Not the cold silver of the moon, but something warmer, something older, something that had no word in any language she knew. The wolf stood where she stood. It breathed when she breathed. It was as present and as real as she was, and it had always been there, and it had simply been waiting. Behind her she heard Darian make a sound she had never heard from him before. Not a word, just a sound, low and sudden, the sound of something unexpected, knocking the careful composure off a man who has been working very hard to maintain it. She turned. His wolf was out, not by his choice. 4 years of suppression, 4 years of holding it back, and it had broken through him the way light breaks through a crack in stone, all at once and without asking. His wolf was large and dark, as controlled-looking as he was even in this involuntary moment, standing 4-legged on the moss of the clearing. And it was bowing. Its great head was down, its muzzle nearly to the ground, and she understood with absolute clarity that this was not a trained response, and not a voluntary one. It was the oldest and most animal response in the wolf's nature. Recognition. Darian himself went to one knee, his hand pressed into the moss. He was not bowing to her. He was not capable of choosing it in this moment. His wolf had made the decision for both of them, and he was simply in the body his wolf inhabited. She stood in the clearing and felt the warmth in her chest, which was no longer only warmth, and no longer only hers, and she breathed, and she let it be real. In the direction of the house, a long way off through the trees, a wolf howled, then another, then 3 at once, then more. The pack had felt it. All of them, sleeping or waking, had felt it. She could feel them feeling it, the particular shimmer through the shared awareness of a pack when something fundamental has shifted. Some of them would know what they felt. Some would only know that something had changed, but all of them felt it. The white wolf stood quiet beside her in the clearing. The dark wolf, on the moss, was still. She looked at Darian. He raised his head. His eyes in the moonlight were very dark and very open, the way eyes look when the person behind them is not managing anything. "Elara," he said. Her name in his voice again, with that weight, but heavier now. Heavier and more open than the kitchen, and more present than anything he had said to her before. "I know," she said, because she did. They stood in the clearing for a long time, and neither of them spoke, and neither of them moved. The white wolf was still. The dark wolf had risen from its bow, and stood now at the edge of the clearing, composed again. The 4 years of held-back nature, slightly less held back after this. Something in Darian himself visibly different. He had not shifted back. He was still standing with his wolf present, in the way she understood now. The wolf not as a skin you put on, but as a part of yourself you could not separate from yourself once it was fully awake. Above the clearing, the moon moved through its arc, the light changing angle as it went, the silver columns on the forest floor shifting slowly. She did not know what to do with the white wolf at her side, except to be with it, to let it be real, to stop, finally and permanently, bracing against the fact of it. It had been sealed for most of her life, and she had spent 3 years in its absence. and she thought she knew what it felt like to be without it, but she understood now that she hadn't. Because being without it was not like a missing tooth or a lost word. It was like living for 3 years with one lung. She breathed differently now, more completely. The light changed. It did not change the way moonlight changes as the moon moves. It changed all at once, the quality of it becoming something warmer and more present, something that had a direction without having a source. She did not feel afraid. She felt the particular alertness of an animal that knows it is in the presence of something much larger than itself. The alertness that is not fear, but is what lives one step before it. The figure at the edge of the clearing was made of the same kind of light that the wolf in her was made of, the same warmth, the same age. There was a shape within it, recognizable in the way her dream had been recognizable, the shape of something unmistakably alive and unmistakably other. She could not look at it directly. Not because it was too bright, because it was too fully present, the way a very loud sound is not painful in the ear, but total in the body. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere. It said her name. 3 times, the same as the dream, but this time, she was awake and standing in the moonlit clearing, and it was not a dream. The sound of her name in that voice was the sound of being known. Not in the way another person knows you, from the outside in, accumulating evidence, from the inside out. The way only the thing that made you knows you. It spoke. It told her what she already understood, and what she had not yet been able to articulate. That the moon mark was not an accident of birth. That she had been chosen before she existed, in the way that certain things are chosen before they need to be. That the seal her mother had placed in her had worked exactly as her mother had intended, holding the wolf until the conditions were right, until the carrier was strong enough and grounded enough and, the voice said, present enough in the world to hold what she carried, without being unmade by it. She had been afraid for a long time that the wolf would unmake her. Standing in this clearing, she understood the fear had been wrong from the beginning. The wolf was her. She had been afraid of herself. Then the voice told her the choice. She could take the full power of the moon mark and come into service of the divine. Leave the mortal world as a separate matter of living. Exist in a different register of reality, between the world that wolves inhabited and the older world that the divine inhabited, carrying the light the goddess needed in places it was needed. She would not die. She would simply be elsewhere. Or she could remain, stay in the world, fully, as a wolf among wolves, with the moon mark power present but settled, balanced at a level she could live with, rather than at its full height. She would keep everything she had built here. She would keep the connections she had made. She would keep herself. The voice said she had until dawn to choose. Then the figure stepped back, and the light did not go out so much as it went elsewhere, and the clearing was only the clearing again, moonlight and moss and the immense old trees and the 2 of them standing inside it. Darian was very still. She turned and looked at him. He looked back at her. His face was open in the way it had been open when his wolf bowed, stripped of the management she had grown accustomed to reading through, and in that openness she could see clearly what was there, and what had been there for some time, and what he was deliberately not saying. "You should go," she said, "back to the house." He looked at her. "This is my choice," she said, "not yours to be part of." He held her gaze. Something moved in his face, something that cost him, and she saw it move through him, and land without being swallowed. He said, "Whatever you choose." He said it carefully. "Choose it for yourself. Not for me. Not for the contract. Not for the pack, for yourself." She looked at him. "You came here on someone else's terms," he said. "This is the one thing that can't be on anyone's terms but yours." She said nothing. She held his gaze. He held hers. Then he turned and walked back through the trees. She heard his footsteps on the forest floor, steady and unhurried, and then the sound of them faded, and there was only the grove around her, and the moss under her feet, and the moon overhead. She stood alone in the clearing with her wolf. She thought about what she wanted, not what would be right, or what would be practical, or what she could justify. She let all of those things fall away, deliberately, the way you set down things you have been carrying for a long time, when you finally have permission to put them down. And she asked herself, in the space that was left, in the bare and simple space, what do you want? She thought about the library, and the sound of rain against the windows. She thought about Felix and Owen, in the depression in the ground, and the particular relief of getting them out. She thought about Marin's rooms at the end of the East Hall, and the fire, and the small jar of cream for dry hands. She thought about Edmund saying thank you in the council room, simply and without ceremony. She thought about Nadia's face in the kitchen, complicated and honest, and beginning to be something more than it had been. She thought about her mother's journal, and the letter inside it, and the words that said the seal was an act of love, and she was already strong enough. She thought about a kitchen late at night, and 2 cups of tea, and a man who had decided to stop wanting things, and was beginning, slowly and without saying it, to change his mind. She stood with all of that. She let it be what it was, and she chose. Dawn came into the grove in long, pale lines between the trees. She had stood through the night, not because she needed to, not out of stubbornness or ritual. She stood because the grove was what it was, and the night was what it was, and she had wanted to be fully present for all of it. She was good at being present. She had been learning how to do it for years, and here, finally, it felt like something she was doing all the way. When the first real light came, she turned and walked back through the trees. The forest was quiet around her. The birds had not started yet. The undergrowth was still and cold, and the massive trunks stood as they had stood for hundreds of years, indifferent and enormous. And she walked between them and felt, for the first time in her memory, entirely like herself. She emerged from the tree line into the pack grounds. Darian was sitting on the bench near the north boundary. He had been there the whole night. She could see it in the way he sat, the particular stillness of someone who has been in one place for many hours. He was looking at the tree line, and when she came out of the trees he stood. They looked at each other across 20 feet of damp grass in the early morning light. She walked to him. She stopped in front of him. "I'm staying," she said. He looked at her for one long moment. Something happened in his face. It happened slowly, the way certain things happen that have been held back for a long time, not explosively, but with a kind of inevitability, the way ice thaws at the edge first. His expression opened. The held things relaxed. He looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them said anything for a few seconds. "Good," he said. She almost smiled. The power inside her was different than it had been the night before. Not less, not more. Settled, present and real and balanced. The moonmark wolf, no longer pressing against a seal, but simply there, sitting at the center of her, the way a stone sits in a riverbed, completely part of the river and completely itself. She felt the pack around her too, differently than she had felt them since she arrived, with a depth and a warmth that had not been present before. The pack awareness was not something she had been fully inside before. She had felt it from the edges. Now she was inside it, and it was inside her, and she understood, without needing to analyze it, what a Luna was supposed to be. Not a function, not a performance. The emotional center of the pack, the warmth, the memory. She was ready to be that now. 3 days after the night in the grove, the full pack assembled in the training field. Cassian was brought out in the company of 2 guards. He walked steadily, without drama, which she had to credit him for. He looked at Darian, and then at the assembled pack. He did not look at Ilara. Darian read the findings of the council judgment in the flat and clear voice he used for things that required precision. Forgery of an elder's signature. Unauthorized external communication with a rival alpha for the purpose of undermining pack leadership. Conspiracy to use the pack's internal uncertainty as leverage for a political removal. Edmund stood at the front of the assembled pack and said that his name had been forged and that he bore no ill will toward his packmates, but that this was not something a council could absorb and continue to function. Aldrich stood beside him and said nothing, but his presence said everything it needed to. The sentence was exile. Cassian left the territory before noon. He walked out of the main gate and down the lane, and the trees took him in, and that was the end of it. Not dramatic, not ugly. Just final. The pack stood in the training field for a moment after, and then Darian said one thing: "We're all right." 2 words, said simply, and something in the field relaxed that had been braced for longer than the last 3 days. Grant Ashford sent a message 2 days after that. Ilara was in the study when Rowan brought it in. Darian read it, set it on the desk, and looked at Rowan. "He's withdrawing from the alliance discussion." "I heard," Rowan said. "Good," Darian said. "We don't need it," Rowan said. "We never did," Darian said. Rowan looked at Ilara briefly. a quick and private look that said several things at once, and then went back out. The council was reconstituted within the week. Edmund and Aldrich retained their seats, both of them cleared without question of any involvement in Cassian's scheme. A third elder was needed, and the nomination came from within the pack, as it was supposed to, through discussion, and then through a vote. Gareth was chosen, a quiet wolf in his early 40s, who had run the pack's training program for 12 years, and who had a way of saying important things in as few words as possible. He took his seat at the elders' table and shook Edmund's hand, and the council began again. The pack itself continued to shift, slowly, and not all at once, and not without friction, because no real change is frictionless, but it shifted. She felt it in the daily texture of her days. The way the great hall sounded different now when she walked in. The way her name was used in conversation rather than avoided. The way young wolves who had looked through her in the first weeks now looked at her. Lena came to her one afternoon on the training field and said, "Felix told Owen about the grove. Owen told me. I don't know if you want people knowing." "It doesn't matter to me," Alara said. Lena nodded. "I thought you should know they're telling it correctly," she said. "They're not making it into something it wasn't." "How are they telling it?" Lena looked at the field. "They're saying that the Luna went into the grove, and her wolf came out." She paused. "And that the Alpha's wolf bowed." "That's what happened," Ilara said. "Yes," Lena said. She was quiet for a moment. "Some things in a pack are hard to build. Trust, belief, the sense that the leadership is solid and real, and not performing." She turned and looked at Alara. "You built some of that, in the grove, without trying to." She paused. "I thought you should know that." "Thank you," Alara said. Nadia came to her, 2 days after the exile, in the afternoon, finding her in the library. She stood in the doorway for a moment, before she came in. She sat across the table. She did not apologize. Nadia was not someone who apologized for things she had done in good faith, which Alara had decided to respect. "What you did in the council room took real courage," Nadia said. "I wanted you to know, I noticed." "Thank you," Alara said. Nadia looked at the table. Then she looked up. "I don't understand what you are." "The moon mark. I've heard of it in old stories. I didn't think it was real." "Neither did I," Alara said. "Are you frightened of it?" Alara considered this honestly. "No," she said, "not anymore." Nadia looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once, in the way of someone who has finished something that needed finishing, and stood. "I'll see you at dinner," she said. "I'll be there," Alara said. It was not friendship yet, but it was the beginning of something real, and she would take real over easy any day. On an evening near the end of the month, Darian found her in the library at dusk. He came in and sat across from her, the same way he had come and sat on the day she had read her mother's journal, and she put down what she was reading and looked at him. He looked back. He had something he was deciding to say, she could tell. The way she could tell most things about him now, with the particular accuracy of being close to someone, in the way they had become close. "The contract runs another 5 months, he said. "I know," she said. "I want you to know that the contract is not why I'm about to say what I'm going to say." She looked at him. He looked at the window. He looked back at her. "Stay," he said. "Not because of the contract, not because of the pack or the council, or any of the rest of it. Because you want to." He paused. "That's the only reason worth having." She looked at him for a moment. The library was warm, and the light was going amber, and the books on the shelves around them were old, and the room smelled of dust and paper, and whatever it was that rooms smell of, when they have been used well for a long time. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. Something crossed his face quickly, and then settled into something that was not the flat expression, and not the open expression from the grove, but something between, something that belonged to this specific moment, and was entirely his. "Yes," he repeated. "Yes," she said. 2 mornings later, before the rest of the pack was awake, she put on her shoes and went downstairs. Darian was already at the back door. They went out together into the early gray of the morning. The pack grounds were empty, and the grass was wet, and the sky was that particular pale color that comes just before the sun breaks over the horizon. At the edge of the North Forest, he looked at her once. She looked back at him once, and then they both let their wolves out. His wolf was dark, large and controlled even in this, moving the way he moved in a room, with unhurried certainty. Her wolf was white and present. brighter against the gray light than anything else in the field. They ran into the trees. Behind them, without being called, the pack came. Not to follow, not because they were commanded, but because a pack knows when something is happening that matters and wants to witness it. They came out of the main building, and the dormitory buildings in ones and twos and then in groups, and they gathered at the edge of the clear land and watched the two wolves move between the trees. Lena was there, and Felix and Owen. Owen still moving carefully with his healing arm. Rowan was there with his arms crossed, and the look on his face of a man who has been watching something develop for weeks, and is quietly satisfied. Marin stood at the edge of the group with her hands folded, her eyes bright. Edmund and Aldrich came out last, slowly, and stood at the back. Nadia came and stood beside Lena. She watched the white wolf move through the trees, with the particular expression of someone who is revising what they understand to be possible. Gareth, the newest elder, stood with the group and said nothing, because nothing needed saying. The two wolves disappeared into the trees, dark and white, side by side, the forest opening and then closing around them, and the whole pack bowed. Not because they were told to, not because of any old law or any command from their alpha. They bowed because something true was in front of them, and they were wolves, and wolves know what truth feels like in their bones. They held the bow for a long moment. Then they rose. The morning came in.